In honor of today being the Super Bowl, I wanted to throw out a quote from Vince Lombardi that I think has a lot of carryover for writers. And here is the quote: "Practice does not make perfect. Only perfect practice makes perfect." So, what does this have to do with writing? Well, the quote of perfect practice, the philosophy, and I guess we'll just call it deliberate practice. The idea of deliberate practice is what I've been advocating for when I talk about not rushing through first drafts, being more conscious about what you're putting down on the page initially. When I talk about having perhaps a bit of a lower word count each day and having those words be quality over hitting doubling that word count, but having those words be absently put on the page. And so when you are writing, I think a lot of people, especially ones that tend to focus a lot on word count and getting these stories done very quickly, right? The ones that do their first draft really bad and they just go, all right, it's going to be a terrible first draft, I'll edit later. What you're doing though is you're not focusing on the perfect practice aspect of it. Instead, you're writing rather almost unconsciously, in a sense, like you're just putting down the first words usually, or the first handful of ideas that come to your head when it comes to forming these words and these sentences. There's no deliberate thought into the exact word choice you should use, or how your sentence and the variation and how your paragraph should be set up, and is this being clear, is it making sense? And when you go for these very quick drafts, you're missing all of the perfect part of it, right? It's kind of like going to, I'll use again the analogy of basketball. It's a bit like, just picking up a ball basically and just shooting the ball around, and then just, if it goes in, if it misses, you don't really care, right? Like you spend 30 minutes walking around maybe the perimeter of the 3-point line, making shots. You walk inside, you walk up near the hoop, you make a couple shots, hit or miss. You maybe take a couple shots from the free throw line, hit or miss. You don't seem to care. Instead, what I'm advocating more for is taking those 30 minutes, basically, just the analogy, basically, and standing at the say at the free throw line, and just focusing on getting your shot in each time correctly. Even if you miss, mastering the form, mastering the art of the shot, focusing on getting the ball in the hoop, trying to control as many variables and repeat the shot as many times as you can, rather than just going in making sporadic shots, which is what I tend to equate a lot of fast writing and a lot of people that focus on just getting words down. That's what it is. It's sporadic shots. You're writing, some of it might be good, a whole lot of it you accept as going to be really bad, but you're not really learning. You're not consciously focusing on improving your writing when you do that, because you're just putting down the first things that come to your head with no conscious thought into, could this be better? Could I select something different? Could I tell the story perhaps in a different way? And there's no evaluation either. You're not evaluating why you chose those particular words. You're not evaluating why the sentence was constructed that way, or why your paragraphs are formed. You just see at the end of the day, hey, I hit my word count for the day, and the story's a little bit further plot-wise than it was earlier. I'm done, and you give yourself kind of a pat on the back. It's somewhat perplexing, but it seems that people tend to think that writing is just one of those things that will improve just with time. Like they tend to think, okay, like even this write every day, they think, okay, I will write every single day, and just by the virtue of the fact that I'm writing, it will magically improve, right? Just by the fact that I'm sitting here and hammering my hands on the keys, it's going to somehow, like in a year, my writing will improve. And what they tend to find is they don't make, when they go with that attitude, you don't necessarily make a whole lot of jump. And the reason for that is touching keys on a keyboard and just hammering them out is not going to improve your writing. That's not what writing is. Writing is an activity that takes place solely in the head. It's thought, it's idea. It's not on the keyboard, it's in your mind. And that's where the practice needs to really happen. So it doesn't need to be the sitting at the keyboard and typing. The practice needs to be on your thoughts in the ideas that you're constructing in the selections you're making on what you choose to put on the page. That is the practice. That is where, if you can master that, the skill of your writing will improve. But you need to focus less on the activity of writing, which is what the word count is, right? Like people talk about hitting word counts and they fast draft these stories. What they're saying is, I'm just going to type the keyboard so many times until I have a set number of words for that day, right? That's not the practice. The practice is in the mind, the idea, coming up with a thought, the notion that you have 1,000 different words you can put down that will reshape this exact sentence in what you choose, and what you put down is going to make the difference. That's where the practice comes in. That's where the skill of you as a writer develops. And I mean, if you just go back and look at your your favorite authors, or the greatest authors of all time here, the ones that are the most celebrated, they weren't the ones that were putting out, I mean, most of the time, they weren't the ones that were putting out, the record number of books. Or if they were, putting out a high volume, they spent years and years and years studying the craft. They were doing exercises that don't exist today. They were reading, obviously, copious amounts of work, but beyond that, they were doing things like copy work, for example. They were outlining sentences, they were diagramming sentences, they were looking at diction and syntax. They were studying, they were not just reading, but they were consciously studying. And again, I'll probably do another video sometime on how to study books rather than read books. But these guys that have achieved this greatness, they went to the page every day conscious that they needed to be very selective about what they write and what they put down. Unconscious writing is for book reports and assignments for school that you don't really care about, that you do last minute. You know what I mean? That's when you approach without any thought, and you just put down the first thing that comes to your head, and you just you pray it gets a B, right? This needs to matter, right? And if you want to develop your skill, it's going to require that conscious deliberation, that practice. Otherwise, you're not going to see the improvement. You're just going to come to the page every time. You're going to revise, and you're going to see small improvements, because obviously with revision you are going to improve somewhat, but your story is not going to make these grand leaps. And you can only, the expression of you can only polish a turd, you can't polish a turd, whatever the expression is, right? That tends to apply a lot with your drafts. Like, you can revise a lot, but your base draft, what you are putting down the first time, that lays basically the foundation for how much you can improve it as well. You can only improve so much from there. And so when I'm talking about deliberate practice, I'm talking about sort of raising the standard basically of your initial writing, so that way your revised writing that comes later can be exponentially greater, than what you would have had before. That way the final product, your final story, you'll look at it and it's absolutely fantastic. But if you're going to approach running every day with just I got an hour, I need to sit at the computer just for an hour, I need to type out, I need to hit my 500 words, my 1,000 words, I need to hit my 2,000 words today, it's just you're not focusing or concentrating on that. And I do want to make something clear. I'm not saying that necessarily having a high word count means that your quality is by default bad. I'm simply pointing out basically that people that tend to write high word counts, they usually don't put in the hours to match that, right? Like, so if it takes you, an hour to put down maybe 250 really quality words, most people aren't going to be sitting at the computer for 8 hours to write 2,000 words, right? You're gonna you're gonna, you're gonna basically cut that in half. You might spend maybe 4 hours at the computer, write 2,000 words, and have half of that be quality. That's my bigger point. And so the people that tend to focus a lot on these high word counts that are trying to get out, the four books, the four self-published books in a year. I mean, like I just can't imagine those books being, of the same quality as someone who maybe takes a year to write one book, right? It's an equation of time over, it's an equation of time over quality, right? Quantity over quality, right? The person that can put out four books in 1 year versus the person that puts out one book in 1 year. I'm willing to guess, all variables being the same, that one book is probably better, just in terms of better prose, better quality, than than any of the other four books individually by themselves. Obviously, this is art. It's somewhat subjective. It's not always true that the one writer may have the one person that puts out four books in a year might have a very high degree of skill, and the person that puts out the one, it might take, they may be very, very low skilled. So an author of equal skill, it's just simple math, right? Like, an author of equal skill, there's more time you spend working on something, the better quality it's going to be, right? It's the same thing. The guy who puts out a book in 1 year, the guy who puts out a book in 7 years. The book that took 7 years to write is probably going to be better than the book that the guy took 1 year to write. It's just by virtue of time put in there and getting more hours of conscious practice into it. And so, if I haven't gotten my the point across yet, I would just take the advice of spending more time just being conscious about what you're putting down. And I mean, try a simple exercise, right? Take a week where whatever your normal word count is, take a week and aim for a goal of half that word count, whatever that would be. So if you write 500 words a day, instead aim to write 250 words a day, but do it within the same amount of time. So in other words, so if it takes you, 2 hours to write 500 words, aim to write 250 words in 2 hours instead, and spend more time focusing and being selective about word choice, not always putting down the first sentence that comes to mind to follow the prior sentence, right? Really think about, all right, what am I trying to say? What works well? In your head, go through like maybe 3 or 4 different options for a sentence to put down next, in a sequence, and just be more conscious. And I will bet you, after that week, even though the total workout will be half basically what you might have done before, you're probably going to be surprised and probably going to realize, wow, this is actually much better, and it's much clearer writing. Obviously, I mean, these jumps basically take time, and just being aware of your thoughts and being very conscious about like the decision of what to put down takes time to develop. But I mean, it's something you can try for yourself, and you can see, wow, this is a lot better writing. And I think for most people, most writers, they would prefer that, right? Like, you would prefer a story that maybe takes twice the time to write, that's twice as good. I think for most of us, they prefer that. I know there are some people, I kind of harped on the people that self-publish, 4 books in a year. Those people will just, by virtue of the fact that they want to get their books out there to make money and to kind of support their writing, and they don't care as much about how the novel sounds. They just care that a story is being told, and it enriches their reader basically, while they're reading it, right? So there are people basically, I think, that are not always aware or don't care as much about the quality of their prose. But for those that are looking to improve their writing, it's going to require that. It's going to require taking more time and just focusing a lot more on what you are putting onto the page.